Albanese government is poised to produce Australia's first budget surplus in 15 years. Live now to MacroBusiness co-founder Leith van Onselen. Lee, this is something they can claim as a win off the back of their own work, or not really?
No, not really. And to be honest with you, I'd say the same if the other mob were in. The fact of the matter is the Albanese government's only been in for around 10 months. So it's not a long period of time. And when they came in, they basically inherited a unemployment rate that was almost at a 50-year low, where it's basically remained. And what this has effectively done is it's meant that there's obviously more people in work, which has boosted income tax receipts. At the same time, it's also lowered the amount that we're spending on welfare, and that's helping the budget. The other main driver of the expected surplus is, in fact, the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, what that's done is that obviously started January last year. That's pushed up commodity prices, so things like gas, coal, and iron ore to all-time record highs. And what that's done is it's led to record mining profits, which has boosted company tax receipts as well as some petroleum resource rent tax receipts. So those two factors together have basically generated this expected budget surplus. And the bigger issue is it's not going to last, because the Reserve Bank themselves, on the back of their aggressive rate hikes, expects the Australian economy to actually have what's called a per capita recession this year, which is basically when the economy doesn't grow as quickly as population growth through our big Australia immigration. And they also expect the unemployment rate to rise. So that's going to obviously reduce income tax receipts and push up welfare payments. And at the same time, these record high commodity prices are very unlikely to last. Even if the Russia-Ukraine war doesn't get solved, the fact of the matter is generally high prices bring in other suppliers, and then that brings the price back down. So, I think it's going to be a fleeting win.
Yeah, I think you're right. Two-pronged question here. A, is this like Christmas for you kind of economic nerds? And B, what are you most looking forward to looking up when this is released on Tuesday?
Look, I'll be honest, I actually hate the federal budget. I find it incredibly boring. It's the same sort of horse trading every year. It's the same speculation. Are they going to do this? Are they going to do that? I basically view politicians as a pack of liars anyway. I'm not a huge fan. But the one thing I do look at is buried right at the very back of the budget, and it should really be up front. It's the net overseas migration forecast. So for some reason, Treasury sets the migration forecast for the country, which is ridiculous. And there has been reports that the migration forecast, after last year we recorded the highest migration ever and our biggest population growth in the nation's history, that net overseas migration is going to hit 400,000, a new record this financial year, before easing back to 315,000 next financial year. Where will they live,
Leith? Sorry to interrupt, but where will they live? Can you answer that for me?
That's a good question. So as I said, last year Australia's population grew by about 480,000. That's an all-time high. And of course, we've seen the impact in the rental market. So we've got rental, rents are rising at double-digit pace, which is the highest in history. Rental vacancy rates at the lowest on record. And then we're going to fire hose another 500,000 people or so into Australia this year and a similar amount next year. At the same time as the building industry is on its knees, with builders falling over left, right and centre. We saw it recently with Portadovers Homes. So we're going to have this absurd situation where we've got record high population growth and demand for accommodation at the same time as supply is going to shrink. So it's basically a housing and inequality disaster in the making. And all it's going to end up doing is going to force rents way higher, and it's going to push thousands of Australians into homelessness. And I've got to be honest, Albanese government's 30,000 social homes program over 5 years is a drop in the bucket. That's 6,000 social homes a year on population increase of about 500,000 a year.
It will not even touch the sides. It will not even touch the sides. What about JobSeeker, rumoured to be increasing unemployment benefits for those over 55? But what about younger people who we know off the back of research, I think, was released today potentially, that shows that they struggle even more financially?
Yeah, that's right. So there's this outfit, I think they're called the E61 Institute, which released research today basically showing that younger job seekers, well, younger being below 55, are basically twice as likely to be living hand to mouth as those who are older. And they experience 2.5 times the financial stress of those who are older. Now, look, my issue with it is that my view is that the golden rule of welfare is that it shouldn't be age-based, it should be needs-based.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be based on what your age is, it should be based on what your need is, right? So obviously if you're extremely poor and you're living in poverty, you need a help. You need a helping hand. Doesn't matter if you're young or old. But unfortunately, the Albanese government, by basically making it age-based and giving a higher, job seeker increase to those who are over 55, have broken that golden rule of welfare, in my view.
What about the news we learned today? The Treasurer came out talking about interest on government debt being the single fastest growing budget expense. He's blaming, of course, the former government.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, to be fair, we've just had a pandemic, and obviously the former government did have to spend a lot of money for it. And in hindsight, they spent too much, but so did every government around the world, because nobody knew how bad this was going to be. And basically, Australia's facing a situation where we'll be paying basically $60 million a day on our in repayments on our debt. So it is a sizable chunk. Yes, you can blame the former government, but the fact of the matter is Labor's going to be staring down the same hole once these temporary factors like the record low unemployment, which they inherited, obviously, as well as the Russian-Ukraine, boost to commodity prices dissipate. So they're going to be, we're going to be back in budget deficit in no time. So, yes, I guess you can blame the former government because they were in, but this was a worldwide pandemic, and governments worldwide are going through the same thing.
They're saying that the priority of the budget will and should be cost of living relief. Do you think we'll see any genuine, and I mean real, relief for real everyday Australian families?
I think at the margin we might see a little bit on energy. So obviously, one of the flip sides of having obviously the highest commodity prices, which has created this export boom and also has boosted the federal budget. The flip side and the downside of it is that the East Coast Australian governments are pretty stupid, and they haven't reserved our gas. So what it's basically meant is compatriots over in the Western Australia are basically paying $6 a gigajoule of their gas because their government had the foresight to basically reserve gas for domestic use. The East Coast government, the East Coast, gas cartel, East Coast Australia is the only gas exporting region in the world that doesn't have domestic reservation. And what this has meant is that we are effectively linked to the global price of energy. So what we've seen, and what any Australian knows this, is they've seen if they use gas, their gas prices have rocketed.
Yeah.
They use electricity, their electricity prices have rocketed because of coal and gas. And what this is doing, this is actually feeding Australia's inflation problem. And it's also caused the RBA to hike rates higher than they would have otherwise done. So we might see a little bit of, assistance at the margin, but it doesn't plaster over the fact that we had a massive stuff up. And this was caused under the Rudd-Gillard government, who initially stuffed this up and didn't do domestic reservation when they approved all those big projects in Gladstone. It's going to be, a drop in the bucket compared to the extra cost that we're paying.
Yeah, utterly ridiculous. I love your way with words. Leith and Onselen, thank you so much. Really appreciate it from MacroBusiness.
No worries, Erin. Anytime.